And tonight our topic is going to be Geck is everywhere. And we will define Geck, we'll give you more details, but for those of you who are new to it, it stands for Give Each Child. So this presentation will be more in depth about how we give each child what they most need. Something that we started to talk to you about in the information sessions back when you were admission families. So again, if you're just joining us, welcome. You're here with our community speaker series. We're just going to give it a few more minutes. And while I have you entering, I'm just going to go over the protocols for tonight, which is that we're going to have the chat feature on for the beginning of the evening because we have a little interactive activity coming up kind of early on. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn it off. This is a presentation, so we have a panel of speakers, but during the presentation at any point, if you have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A button, which is a bit at the lower right of your screen, and you can just pop your questions in there. And we'll leave some time at the end to address parent questions. And or if we don't get to the questions, we have an email right at the end. I'll also put it into the chat so you can see it. So you're welcome to follow up and email us any questions. And again, we'll make sure to get back to everyone. So I'm going to go ahead just for a minute and kind of take you through our agenda for tonight. And again, if you're just joining us, welcome. You're here with Geck is Everywhere. We have a fantastic panel of people tonight. And here's the plan. We're going to do a little warm-up activity where people are going to respond to us in the chat. I'll kind of take you through that on the next slide. And then I'm going to hand it off to Sue Kingman, who's going to talk about who and what is Geck, kind of taking it a little deeper. She'll hand it to Kelly Henry, who's one of our cognitive specialists, who's going to take us through a bit of the rigorous data collection that we do here at Carroll and how we actually use this data to inform instruction every day. And then Allison West and Kate Collins, our division heads for the middle school and upper school respectively, are going to pick it up with a case study on a student named Sean and look at the developmental sequence and what are the appropriate interventions for each of the data points that we see. And finally, we'll finish off the evening with a little time for some question and answers. And again, if you're just joining us, the chat will be on just for the beginning of the presentation. We're going to do a little warm-up activity. But should you have questions thereafter during the presentation, please use the Q&A button at any time to ask us some questions. Okay, so I'm going to move ahead to the next slide and get us started on the activity. So I'm going to define Geck for you here in more depth. So you've heard a lot about Geck. You've heard us talk about it, at the very least, in information sessions for admission. And we use Geck in multiple ways. And thinking in the frame of we're language experts here, we have to define it as a noun, a verb, and an adjective for you. So as you can see on the slide, we use Geck as a noun. So at Carroll, Geck is core to our success. And then we use Geck as a verb. We need to Geck this student to optimize progress in reading. And finally, as an adjective. We had a Geck meeting to adjust Allison's focus area class. So throughout the presentation, you'll hear us use that word Geck in multiple ways. So let's take a look at our activity. For all of you out there, if you could use the chat button and please chime in and let us know, what does Geck make you think of? When you hear that phrase, give each child what they most need. So what we're hoping is that during the presentation, we hear a bit more about what you think Geck is. I see someone talking about Geck means personalizing their learning, meet each child where they are, personalized learning support, meet students where they are. Okay, I think you all could work at Carroll. Oh, there's a lot more. Okay, tailoring education to each child's level, ability, and capacity. Love that. Our current school talks about meeting each child at their just right level. At first blush, Geck sounds like individualizing that further. Okay, we have a very knowledgeable parent base out there, so nice job to all of you. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand this off to Sue Kingman, our lower school division head. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. This is Sue Kingman. I'm the lower school division head, and I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about Geck to get us started. And listening and reading all of your comments about what resonates from you when you hear the word Geck is interesting in that it's all quite aligned with our thinking as well, as Stacy indicated, and also is really representative of the complexity of this concept. The origin of this concept was really conceived in Steve Wilkins' brain. As many of you know in the audience, Steve Wilkins was our head of school before Renee Greenfield joined. And about 4 to 5 years ago, he conceived this concept of Geck. And it really came out of his and the senior administration's just steadfast commitment to provide and to be responsive to what more we can do to help our kids thrive where they were not able to thrive before. So it's a made-up term, and it's something that's become very much sort of the hallmark of all of our decision-making and programming. And it's like a large puzzle, as you see on the screen, for each of our 442 students. And in fact, one question that I often ask teacher candidates when I interview them to be teachers at Carroll is if they like to solve puzzles, because to me that is a good indication of whether they'd be a good teacher fit for Carroll. So when you look at this puzzle, you'll see that there are 6 puzzle pieces, each representing our core programmatic priorities. Our measures of how well we are gecking, yes, I'm using gecking as a verb, a child, is how well these puzzle pieces all fit together. And when they are not linked in place, we know that in order to mobilize a child, that we need to focus on those unlinked areas. So what are those puzzle pieces for a child? Let's look at them individually. So there's the academic program puzzle piece, which is the core reading, writing, and math skill development that we're focusing on each and every day. There's the dyslexic advantage, and you've all heard that term that we use a lot, and that's how we leverage a child's strengths to fortify their weaknesses and how to capitalize on what they do well to build their confidence and also give them the stamina to work through the hard things. There's the social emotional puzzle piece, which is all around resilience and confidence and self-actualization and socializing skills. There's the executive functioning puzzle piece, which is how efficient is their learning and their output. There's the neuroscience, which is we're always guided by a student's neuropsychological profile and all those strengths and weaknesses that come out of all that information. And the DEIJ, where we talk about identity, inclusivity, and equity, and the child's ability to be empathetic and to see and appreciate others' perspectives. So who are the Geckers? Each child has many eyes and brains on their Geck team. It starts with the admissions team. So the admissions team at the gate, making sure that we can provide for what each child needs coming in the door. It's then the division heads guiding the process after a child is admitted. It's our academic leadership team who are all participating in the admissions process and also making class assignments based on all they learned from the admissions process in learning about a child and how they're regularly studying progress for each child. The teachers and tutors who are looking at day-to-day informal assessments to be sure kids' needs are being met. All the outside providers who are consultants to us who have a broader understanding of the child's history and the child's overall experience are part of the team. You all as parents, you are without question the best experts on your child. And your active partnership in how we're gecking your child is very much important to us. There's a cognitive research team who are analyzing all we know and prescribing cognitive interventions. And there's more to come in the slides ahead on that more specifically. There's our SLPs, our speech and language pathologists, who have a targeted lens on language processing needs. And of course, there's the counselors in our building who are constantly consulting on social emotional well-being and availability for learning. So lots of eyes and brains on kids. So how do we make it happen? So again, it begins with the admissions experience and the collection and analysis of all the previous testing that we've received and we require in the admissions process. It also starts with baseline testing that we do during the admissions visit and during the first few weeks of school. It also happens in the homogeneous small class assignments that we make for English language arts and math with students of similar learning profiles. It's about the programming of the focus blocks. So it happens in how we determine that focus block for each and every child. Does it have an Orton-Gillingham, an OG focus? Does it have a reading comprehension focus, a fluency focus, a writing or a math or executive functioning or any combination thereof focus? It's how we are programming our flex interventions. So that's where TCI lives for our grades 4 through 9 and is a skill booster for half the year while TCI happens for the other half. And for our youngest learners, it's a dedicated booster of skill interventions, mostly for reading acquisition and fluency. And in the middle school, it could be health and wellness, and it could be where our DEI work is housed. So we look at those flex interventions extremely flexibly about how we can leverage what your child needs in more direct ways. And it also happens in our advisory and homeroom support systems. So as you know, your children are in small advisory and homeroom groups, and it provides the grounding and previewing and reflection and planning and organizational times of the day, which is very important to our kids as learners. And all while progress monitoring is happening 3 times a year. So in the form of CBAs, which are our curriculum-based assessments, all in the form of standardized assessments that we're doing 3 times a year, classwork samples, non-standard informal daily monitoring, and of course, how we are reporting to you all in parent conferences 4 times a year. So we've mentioned Geck being informed by daily performance and lots of data. So what do we do with all that data? I'm going to have Kelly Henry, who's a past parent of ours and a member of our cognitive research department, explain in more detail. Take it away, Kelly.
Thanks, Sue. Carroll really is a data-rich environment, and I think that's evidenced by the fact that I am here. I am a full-time data analyst at Carroll, and I think that is a pretty big rarity at elementary and middle schools to have a full-time data analyst on staff. And I am really happy to be here. As Sue said, I am the parent of a former student. She was at Carroll from 5th through 8th grade and is currently a sophomore at NYU. So let me talk through the data. We've got lots of it, and our process really happens in 3 steps. That first step is the data collection. And when I think about the data, we're really breaking it into categories. Is it qualitative or quantitative? So quantitative would be something we can assign a number to. Your child read 122 words per minute. They're in the 50th percentile. Qualitative is a little bit softer. Sometimes people think of it. It might be feedback from you as parents. It might be a student work sample. And we're also thinking about how frequently data is updated. So there are some sources of data that we get through the admissions process that we may never see again. If that student isn't with us for a while, they don't get an updated WISC, that might be a one-time source. There are some assessments that happen regularly 3 times a year, our Track My Progress, our reading fluency, those Orton-Gillingham curriculum-based assessments are happening. And we even have some data sources that give us daily or weekly data. So an example of that would be the games that students play during their targeted cognitive interventions. We're getting a data download daily to monitor their progress there. And the other thing that's happening all the time is this qualitative information. So work samples, teacher interactions with students, feedback that we get from parents, and discussion within teams. So we are collecting lots and lots of data. And it's really great to have that data, but it doesn't mean a whole lot. It doesn't do a whole lot for us if we don't put it to good use. So our next step is to disseminate this data. And about 6 years ago, Carroll invested in creating a large database where we take and we put all this quantitative data. And that enables us to track a student progress. It also enables us to make it visible to faculty and administrators who interact with students. So in this database, anytime new data is generated for a student, their reports get updated overnight, and anyone who interacts with that student can go into our system and look at any of that new information. So you may have seen information or charts or graphs from our database. Maybe you saw them in parent-teacher conferences. You might have had a data meeting, and you will, if you haven't yet, you'll see some charts and graphs and tables that'll come to you in an end of the year report. So as part of my job, I'm constantly interacting with faculty and administration to find good data visualizations that actually make sense for them to look at this data, and the ones that are best suited to the different data sources. So all the charts that you see won't look exactly the same. They'll be tailored to best suit the data source. And let me show you just a few examples of the kind of things we're looking at. This one here is a cognitive skill. It's processing speed. It's something that we test our 4th through 9th graders on. You'll see that we're tracking the students' score as they go through time and all the different times they've taken this assessment. And down below, we're looking at the actual number of raw responses that they made that were correct and incorrect, and we're tracking their accuracy percentage as a way to kind of get an idea of how they're approaching this task. The next one we have is an academic test from Track My Progress, and that's the math portion of it. And we're tracking their scale score here, and we're using some color coding to indicate their performance level, that they're above grade level, on grade level. That's just a way to show that. Beneath that, we're also showing how long they took to do that test, which is important because often our students can be very good at things, but perhaps they're laboring for a long time to get that good score. Conversely, we might see kids who kind of breeze through an assessment in a short period of time, don't do very well on it, and can be encouraged to spend a little more time and have a better performance on that. The next one is oral reading fluency, something that's super important to us at Carroll. We're showing here their raw score in terms of correct words per minute. So they're given these reading passages, they go through them. How many words correct could they get in 1 minute? We're showing that against these sort of rainbow colored lines that show grade level percentiles. So not only do we know how the student is progressing in terms of their words per minute, but how are they advancing through percentiles? How are they holding up against same age peers and same grade peers? We also want to look at, on the right there, their accuracy. So how accurate are they able to be as they read through here? And that gives us a good idea if this text is on their grade level, if they're able to access it. We're putting a table below here so teachers can get the exact numbers. You'll see on the right, we recently also started tracking expression. So a teacher is giving a student a rating for their expression as they read through. And that's a good indicator whether they're reading sort of robotically and maybe not understanding what they read, or if they're reading more conversationally, which is a good idea that they're actually understanding the text that they're reading. So we have these reports that go through sort of every assessment a student has ever done with us since they, in fact, before they got to us. And if your student has been with us more than a couple of years, their report could be somewhere in the range of 19 pages or so. So there's a lot of information there. And we are constantly thinking of how do we think critically about this data. So our first two steps are to collect it and then to visualize it. And now we need to really analyze it and think about it. So we are teaching our teachers as we go through some Carroll courses and data-informed instruction to really think about what is this assessment measuring? Is it measuring reading fluency or reading comprehension? Is it a T-score? Is it a percentile? Think about things like that. We want to know how the student has progressed. Is that line going up and to the right like we would like it to be? Are they in that average range? Did they start out much lower than that? So if they're in the average range but kind of started there, that's very different from a student who started very low and has sort of struggled to get into that average range. We want to look at, is that line a pretty steady trend, or are they kind of all over the place? And as you probably know from interacting with your students at home, variability is a characteristic of students with learning differences. They're often able to do something really well one day, and the next day, it's like they've never even been introduced to the concept. So if we see that variability, we know they're capable of it, but they just haven't mastered it yet. As we go through, we want to look at discrepancies in performance. Is this student okay at decoding when they can take their time, but as soon as that timer is turned on, they kind of fall apart, either due to anxiety or the fact that they're just not efficient at that task? We want to look at things like modality. Are they having trouble keyboarding? So if they have to enter responses on a keyboard and maybe they know the right response but press the wrong button, that might give us some clues. Or things where they need to write things down, their fine motor skills might be lacking. So we're really trying to look at these patterns and find similarities and differences where scores are high and low to give us an idea into how this student is really performing. And over all this, we're overlaying that qualitative information. And I was looking through some of my notes from our data informed instruction course that we gave a few years ago. And one of the things that we urged teachers to do was really to apply their knowledge, their experience, and their intuition as they look at this data, to think about what they know about that student. Think about what they're hearing from you about how a student is doing their homework, whether things are easy for them, if there's something else that's happening in their life that's affecting their performance here. So we're really trying to overlay all that on it and get the whole picture of this child. So as I mentioned, these reports could be really long, and that's great, and they can be useful for some purposes, but we really wanted to find a way to get the picture of the whole child. So we developed what we call a radar chart or a spider chart, and that is showing the child's performance on multiple assessments. You have probably seen one of these in an admissions session or somewhere else as we go, but this is something that is constantly being updated and rethought and refined. And in fact, this version that you're seeing here is one that I've just been using for a couple of weeks, and it came out of a conversation with our lower school head of the language department, and this is the way she likes to look at things, and it seems to serve people very well. So what we've done here, and I'll just explain this briefly, around the rim are the names of all the different skills or assessments. And what you have here is that we have grouped them so that we can get an idea of those patterns of where a student is strong or where they need to do some work. And what you're seeing here with these blue lines, the further out they are from the center, the more that skill has been mastered, the better the student is at that skill. And where it's very small and in toward the middle, that is a place where they need to do some work. So these have become an important tool for us. You'll probably see them. This is the data of a hypothetical Carroll student. It's not a real student, but this profile is pretty common. Something like this is pretty common among quite a number of our students. So that is a hypothetical student, and I'm going to hand off to Allison to talk us through the data of an actual student and let us know how all the people at Carroll were able to Geck him.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here tonight, and I have been a pal of Geck for a very long time, and I'm really excited to be able to show you how Geck is put into practice. So I'd like to introduce you to Sean, and Sean came to us in the 3rd grade, and this spider chart shows, as you can see, a variability of skills that he's coming to school with. And just to orient you just a little bit, as a reminder to what Kelly just explained, The labels along the perimeter, those note the academic and cognitive skills being assessed. The lines of the web represent percentile bands. And the closer that blob is to the center means the less developed the skill is. And as that blob grows out toward the edge, that represents growth in that particular skill. So as you can see here, Sean's listening comprehension, which is at about 11 o'clock, is really a strength, and one that we're going to want to use to help him build some of the lagging skills. And while he has some phonological awareness skills intact, like segmenting sounds, which is seen at about 1 o'clock, elision, which is a task that asks him to omit sounds in words, is a significant challenge. Similarly here, we can see that such skills as word ID, which is reading sight words, and other skills required for reading fluency, which you can see down in the 4 and 5 o'clock, and then in the 7 o'clock range, are all quite underdeveloped. Therefore, when mapping out his 3rd grade program, we want Geck to help guide us through that data in selecting a focus area class. And in this case, it's really clear that Sean really requires an Orton Gillingham tutorial for his focus area class. As we saw in that spider chart, reaction time and executive functioning challenges, those told us that we need to build his cognitive development program with opportunities to build his logical reasoning and visual thinking skills. And knowing that students like Sean can struggle to maintain a positive self-image and self-confidence, we need to make sure that we have built in a goal around helping him recognize that he is with like learners and he can succeed. And similarly, Sean is working to build his awareness in 3rd grade of himself as well as others in order to embody the core values of ERIC, which in the lower school stands for empathy, respect, inclusion, and kindness. And all the while, all of the educators that are working with Sean are drawing upon his strengths to really help him capitalize and continue to grow on his listening comprehension. And they're going to work to foster growth and progress in those areas as well. And as Sean moves through and it continues on his academic journey, we are going to stop here at 5th grade. And just as Sean has grown physically, we can see that he has actually made some impressive gains in his academic and cognitive abilities. So that dotted line that you see here on the chart, that was him in 3rd grade. And the solid blue blob is now Sean in 5th grade. And we can see that his phonological skills are solidly intact. His ability to decode has improved dramatically, which is represented in word attack at about 2 o'clock. And his executive functioning skills, which are at about 8 o'clock, represent significant improvement. All aspects of fluency remain low. They remain underdeveloped. And reading comprehension and sight word reading also are areas that are requiring more attention. And so as we're Gecking his program for 5th grade, we know that we have to adjust and individualize in order to address the growth that we see in that spider chart while also targeting those areas of need. And so OG has been a super effective intervention for Sean. And now he's ready for a small group focus area. And in that small focus area, there is still a need to review the concepts within Orton Gillingham, but we see now that we can shift to having a stronger focus on building fluency and automaticity. The data in the spider chart also revealed a need to really shift our cognitive focus. Executive functioning was looking really strong. And so now we need to work to build his reaction time. And as his awareness of his learning profile grows, we're going to continue to push Sean to grow his awareness of others through direct and explicit instruction in perspective taking. Again, we're always using his strengths within comprehension to help Sean step toward success and build confidence. And it's really important that we provide opportunities for Sean to see and feel how his effort is rewarded. And it's essential to combat that low effort failure that he experienced in previous years. And low effort, the sort of low effort failure syndrome is when a child tries so hard, so very hard, and continues to experience failure, and then begins to believe that what's the point of trying if I'm only ever going to fail? And at this point in 5th grade, we begin to see that he's seeing some success with that high effort. And so we want to make sure that we continue to move that along. All right, so now Sean has now moved into the middle school, and we're going to pause at 7th grade, and we're going to see how Sean has continued to grow. We're going to see what Geck has been up to. And as you can see, this chart shows that Sean is beginning to really consolidate skills and show real meaningful progress in most areas that were at one time considered significant areas of deficit. There really are not a lot of areas that are close to the center anymore. We can see that that blob has just continued to grow and develop. So again, Geck guides us into designing an effective program. The good news is Sean has cracked the code, and his focus area can now shift even further. And the focus can be now on continuing to build the automaticity and fluency of his oral reading. And with that, reading comprehension becomes a focus as well, because as he's having to spend, now that he's spending less time having to decode, he can spend more of that cognitive power on the meaning behind the words. Research tells us that there is a very high correlation between reaction time and rapid naming and oral reading fluency. And so when Geck saw that, he knew that providing an additional dose of reaction time intervention is really called for. And so that happened here for Sean in 7th grade. Again, we want to tap into those strengths because that's what's going to allow Sean to continue to develop skills necessary for a successful transition to high school, wherever that may be, and using the strengths within his listening comprehension and other areas to teach him how to take split page notes, for example, during a class discussion. Those become an essential part of his program. And guiding Sean to participate in a variety of after-school activities, in this case, sports, was a real gift, a real talent, and is really essential. And nudging him to join things like student council and other clubs, we were able to offer opportunities for Sean to find and nurture strengths and areas of strength. And in fact, he began to seek out those opportunities on his own. For instance, although he was signed up for basketball in the wintertime, Sean actually opted to spend Tuesdays in an after-school study hall because he knew Tuesday nights were far too busy for him to get his homework done. And so this type of independence and this type of metacognitive awareness is really what we're aiming for. We also, at this stage, begin to make Sean's progress visible to him by beginning to share some of this data and some of this information with him so that he can, again, see this high effort truly beginning to pay off in ways that he didn't think were possible before. And again, we're going to bring Eric into the middle school, that empathy, respect, inclusion, and kindness that he was working on in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And now Sean is going to take those skills and participate in Foundations for Brave Conversations, which is a curriculum that is designed to guide Sean in exploring his own identity along with the world around him, so that he can engage in meaningful discussions around topics such as race, gender, class, and more. Now, as Sean's time in the middle school nears its end, our conversation begins to shift towards thinking about what are the elements of a program, a high school program, that Sean needs that's going to allow him to thrive, not survive, but to truly thrive. And one of those options is, in fact, the upper school at Carroll. And so now I would like to turn this over to my colleague, Kate, who's going to share a little bit about how Geck would travel with Sean to the upper school just a few miles down the road. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Allison. Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Collins, and I'm the head of the upper school. And I am happy to introduce you to 9th grade Sean. And As you can see, he has grown in many ways. His mostly what I notice is his jawline, but that's for another day, maybe. But we were happy to welcome Sean to the upper school, and his strengths is, as his radar suggests, are not just he has continued to grow in areas, and has an impressive maintenance of skills. As you see the dotted blue line, Sean's skills have been maintained. I can't flip through the slides back to third grade, but if you remember the peaks and valleys per se of his profile, it's important to notice how much more even he appears in this. It's also important to notice, just as Kelly shared, that there's lots of data on the side that's not visible. So by the time Sean arrives in our 9th grade program, there's so much more that we know about him that we can't see here in this chart. And in some ways, that is exactly also what Geck is taking the full collection of Sean's data and utilizing it. Sean's upper school program is going to capitalize on his academic and cognitive progress and continue to focus on reading fluency and reading comprehension. His focus area will be a small group, and it will focus largely on written expression, with a strong focus on both the sophisticated sentence level writing and essay writing, really the writing that's required of a high school program. We are a rigorous high school program in the 9th grade and in our 8th grade. And also reading across the curriculum. High school expects more of students, more writing, more reading. So we're Gecking Sean for more. As you know from seeing his journey, he's developed a lot of skills, and we're really focusing on Gecking him to employ those skills independently and to enhance his independence. This supports Sean in skills for his independence and the metacognitive skills of what he needs, how he knows what he needs, how he knows how to ask for what he needs. For Sean, this meant understanding the amount of reading that he had for homework, for instance, and that perhaps audio support would be important, or that utilizing office hours on Fridays required pre-planning, and for him to ensure that he had time to see each of the teachers that he needed to. Sean transitioned from our traditional NCLU, our No Child Left Unorganized afternoon kind of end of the day advisory block, into what we refer to as INCLU, which is an independent NCLU, where he's able to take the skills that he's learned over his years and independently apply them. He's also thinking and working on writing across the curriculum, lab reports, history research papers, writing in geometry class. There's an incredible amount of language demand in math as math progresses through high school. We're also continuing to think about him developing his self-concept and his confidence, having self-appreciation, basically learning to develop the stamina that not to let mistakes stop you. Hiccups are going to happen. The confidence that's been developed at Carroll can continue while also meeting challenges in struggling and knowing how to respond when you do struggle. A lot of high school is also about developing an identity, who you are, why you are who you are, and having time to reflect on that. And our 9th grade program is also thinking about Gecking that experience. So in the same ways that the middle school is working on developing of friends and having fun, leadership opportunities, et cetera, in 9th grade, we're thinking deeply about belonging and identity, and also accountability, being a citizen in a community. What does that mean? How does your perspective taking skills and active listening skills make you the person who you want to represent in the community that you're in? We also continue through the Foundations for Brave Conversations. We offer students affinity spaces and really talk to students a lot about finding their voice, both academically and socially. What does it mean to, again, be a member of a community and meeting students exactly where they are and finding that voice. We have students who raising their hand and answering a question is where they are. and students who are leading GSA announcements about transgender rights and speaking up on behalf of others in wonderful ways. This Geck is in all that we're doing in the upper school, and obviously throughout the Carroll experience. We also, it is a dynamic and responsive, Geck is dynamic and responsive. It allows us to not only progress students along a continuum of academic and cognitive skills, but also along a continuum of program delivery. It's a scaffold towards independence. So as students are growing, our Geck model is responding to their growth. Our outcomes, the desired outcome for students is that we are working towards a less dependency on specialized programming, growth in independent learning, skill acquisitions become owned and internalized, and students become self-aware, and lights don't go off. Hold on, that's exciting. Hold on 1 second, I'm gonna Geck my lights and turn them back on again. That's exciting. That moment was even more exciting with the silence that I got to experience when it was happening. I apologize for that. So this was all possible. We are also looking for self-aware, reflective students that have strong self-advocacy skills. And that is made possible. The student growth that we're looking for through our Geck model is made possible because Geck is everywhere, literally everywhere. Our stages of Geck growth, we're really thinking about that across a spectrum or a continuum. In our focus area, for instance, students are often starting in a one-on-one, highly diagnostic OG instruction. And that doesn't necessarily mean for BRs, third graders, that can be in our 8th grade program, that can be for some of our 9th graders. It's about who the child is, who the student is, and what they need. Some students progress then to a 2-on-1 OG instruction or into small group OG writing, math, or EF focus areas. We are also looking for students to become, thinking about becoming independent, their independent learner growth. So scaffolding, remedial instruction through independent application of these learn strategies. We have students thinking of their approach to learning. So going from passive to more self-aware. In their approach, in class size, we're looking at homogeneous classes of 8 to heterogeneous classes of 12, looking at larger groups, knowing that students have opportunity to engage with in a larger group setting. The diversity of the group matters. It can be increased. Students are being prepared for where they're headed next. And of course, within our TCI program, starting with working through programs that are easy to access to more challenging content that is really focusing on higher order cognitive growth. Ultimately, our Geck is truly through the Gecking of individual skills and the program, thinking about each student individually, what they need and how they're going to get what they need. And that is what Geck is. And I'm going to pass this back to Stacy, who is going to lead us through some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate, Sue, Allison, and Kelly. We have some great questions coming up. Just functionally, I just wanted to remind parents that we are recording and we will make the recording available on our website. We have a page that has all the previous events listed. And also wanted to just let you know there's some upcoming events as well. I'll tell you about those just at the end. So we had some questions here. And Sue, I was going to ask you, do parents need to request a data meeting or do these happen automatically as part of our cycle?
Stacey, a really good question. And this question is often asked. So parents can request a meeting about their child with any concerns or questions at any time. And sometimes those meetings can be full-blown data meetings where we would run through all of that information that you saw sort of quickly today that Kelly Henry showcased. on your child and share with you all that we have and every bit of data and how we're interpreting it and how we're Gecking for your child. Two, it could be a modified version of that. There might be just a concern with how the focus area is going or how math is going, or there may be some concerns about your child socially, emotionally. So what we do typically is when we hear an interest to have a meeting outside in addition to a parent conference, is that we'll better understand, we'll call you, we'll better understand what you're looking for, what you need, because not everybody wants the in-depth version. And some people have just very isolated specific concerns, and sometimes they're much more comprehensive. So we try to get you and better understand what it is that you need as a response to a meeting. And then we'll schedule the meeting. So sometimes they can be full-blown data meetings, and sometimes they can be very specific meetings based on your questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Sue. So a couple more questions. One, Allison, I was going to ask you, and then Kelly, I was going to ask you something. So we had some questions around the radar charts and when those are available to parents. Sort of how long does a student need to be at Carroll before we start developing these, and when are these shown to parents?
Another great question. So we have radar charts available pretty much at any time. As soon as data is entered into our database, the database is refreshed and it populates a new report for us. It is a stagnant report. The spider charts that we showed you this evening that represent sort of that longitudinal growth over time were a specialized visual. The radar charts that we have are more stagnant, just one data point at a time. But again, just in the same way as Sue was describing, that we will meet at any time to go over any of this data. That can include a spider chart as well.
Great, thank you so much. So Kelly, we've talked through this presentation a little about something called reaction time, and I'm not sure that everybody in our audience knows what reaction time is.
Okay, so reaction time is just the ability to respond to a stimulus. And so you've probably heard about, like, Tom Brady is working on his reaction time. And that for him is the ability to respond to, I guess, people coming to tackle him. Not something we need to work on at Carroll, but the reaction time that we test would be the ability to respond to a word when it comes on your screen. So that very basic, simple reaction time. And then we're looking at a reaction time or a response time when it comes to actually making a decision about that. So if the word blue comes on your screen and it's written in blue, you hit the space bar. So that ability to respond quickly to that. So what we know is that is highly correlated with reading ability, and it is the same neural pathways that are used when a student looks at a word and immediately knows what that word is. That's a word they've seen frequently, and they can remember that word. It's the same neural pathways that let them know that that's a D and not a B. So that is how that all comes into effect. And did you want me to talk a little bit about our training, our RT training?
I'd love that. Thank you.
Yeah, so most of the students, when we first test them, and we do this cognitive testing on students from 4th to 9th grade, most of the students, when they first come to us, when we first test them, will be weak on their reaction time. And we will do some reaction time training through TCI, which is our targeted cognitive intervention. And that is a form of Geck, because that target is different for every student. And if their target is reaction time, we will set up a program for them where they work on games, what we call games. And if you have a student that's an actual gamer and plays like PlayStation or Sega or whatever it is, they will very strongly tell you this is not a game, or certainly not a good one or a fun one. But we are working on getting them to respond to things quickly. So they are playing games like that are very similar to whack-a-mole. So you've got to hit the mole that is blue or that is purple, or you've got to respond to the shape that is like the stimulus shape, or the object that looks like the object you last saw. So getting them faster and faster at responding to those things with no words. So actually our TCI doesn't involve reading, which is a good part of it. And so in some ways, that's a little bit of a break for our students. We're not asking them to read, but we are able to know that through doing these programs, we have good evidence that says these reaction time scores go up after these programs, and it is building those pathways that enable them to do that recognition of words and letters and other things that they need to know academically.
So Kelly, just to kind of tie this together then, so what you're saying is through all of this training that we do, there is sort of academic transfer, that this does impact a child's learning profile and their performance.
Absolutely. So we look at the skills that are foundational to be able to acquire fluency, and where those are weak, we're going to work on building them up. So whether it's a working memory program for a student that's having trouble with their memory, or processing speed program, an executive function program, we are getting them working on those games, coaching them through, and building those skills that can help them be able to take advantage of all the great OG tutoring and all the other instruction that goes on at Carroll.
And then just one final follow-up question. How do we understand programmatically what each child needs in terms of their cognitive training?
So we are taking great care to look through all the testing they do. We pre-test every student when they first come to us, and before every round of TCI, we're looking at how well they do each task, whether they do it quickly and less accurately, or whether they're quite slow and very accurate, how well they're able to remember things that they hear or things that they see, and taking a lot of care and looking at that data to decide where the weaknesses are and where we can build up.
Great. Thank you so much. We did get one question from a prospective parent about what sort of assessments we do as part of the admission process, or to help families understand whether Carroll has the right programming for their child. And I would say that question might be something that we should answer through the admission funnel and so forth. So I urge that parent who asked that question to email us at parentquestions@carrollschool.org, or any other admission questions. I'm glad to kind of take those on tomorrow morning. In addition, I wanted to let you all know of some upcoming speaker series that you might want to mark your calendar. We'll be sending out some reminders, but January 6th, Thursday, we're going to have writing at Carroll, where we'll dig in a little bit more specifically on what the writing program looks like. Thursday, February 3rd, we're going to have a topic that people just love, which is about executive functioning and independence. And finally, on March 3rd, led by Allison Harmon, who's our director of counseling, we're going to host something called Trauma-Informed Conversations. And it's about much more than just sort of trauma as we know it. I think with the pandemic and so much that has happened in a social emotional context for our children, and globally and nationally, important conversations. So we thank you all so much for joining us. We wish you a wonderful upcoming weekend, and please reach out if you have further questions. We're eager to connect and glad to help. And thank you again to all our panelists. Have a wonderful evening.